just want to say hello and welcome to everyone. First of all, it's great to have you coming out to the webinar tonight. The great thing about webinars is they're weather friendly. You don't have to worry about traveling anywhere. Here's your first test, participants. We're going to do a poll. So we just like to do this at the beginning of the session to let us know what you are joining us as in your main capacity. So, you may be both a parent and teacher, but are you coming more as a parent on your school council or as a teacher tonight? And if you don't fit into any of these 5 categories, then please feel free to type into the chat box. So go ahead now, and if you can just let us know where you're coming from. Charles has just posted that he's a researcher. That's good. We should have researchers up there too, shouldn't we? For the next time.
I think, maybe a nonprofit is a community organization.
Yeah, that's what I would probably consider a community organization.
People are typing E into the chat. Chandra has typed E into the chat, so maybe Chandra can't put the E
it's
up
okay, he also
there.
put it up in the proper spot. That's fine. You got it. It's there. Okay, so I think we've got most people have participated. Last chance, I'm going to reveal the results. So if anybody hasn't voted, please vote now. You go to the poll button. It's the 4th square under your name and choose your answer.
Anna, you can put your answer.
Okay, and there are our poll results. So it looks like we have a lot of nones. I don't know. Quite a number of people from community organizations. No school board staff here tonight. Interesting. So it looks like we've got a good cross-section of people. It should be an interesting session tonight. So without further ado, I've now probably gone well over my time, so I'm going to hand it over to Annie, who's going to do a little bit of a project overview and then introduce our guest speaker.
And here I am, and there are still people coming in, so that's great. So if anybody comes into the session and can't hear, which you won't hear this message, just type in the chat box and people will help you. My name's Annie Kidder, and I'm the Executive Director of People for Education, and my job is to give you a very quick overview of the project that we're working on, the initiative called Measuring What Matters. This is our second webinar. Our first one was about health. We had Bruce Ferguson talking to us about what how we define health in a very broad way, why it matters in schools, how we could look at evidence of health in schools, and how we could possibly measure health. Measuring What Matters overall is a 5-year project where we are working to broaden the definition of success. We think that the definition of school success has become kind of narrow and very focused on literacy and numeracy. Literacy and numeracy are incredibly important, but we feel that we need to broaden it out to add more pieces to the things that we ways that we define success and things we focus on in school. And it's important because what you focus on, the goals you set, and what you measure tend to be what you focus your policy on, what you spend money on, what schools spend time on, and certainly from the outside, what people recognize as these are the important parts of a good, strong education. So we are suggesting that there are other areas that could be where we could have goals and we could measure, and those areas are health. And that's health writ large. So that includes mental health, physical health, various aspects of health, creativity and innovation, citizenship, which we're going to talk about tonight. We've actually already added one, so you can see that this is a very fluid project. We have added social emotional skills, which are some hard, good skills that kids need in order to succeed, and school climate, so the quality of the learning environment. So our goal over the next 3 years is to develop a set of indicators so that we can actually measure these things in schools. And our ultimate goal is that we end up with measures that are useful to people working in schools. So we're working with teachers, with principals, with school board directors with people from the government to develop measures that are useful, and there's a sort of technical development part working with a lot of academics. But we also want to develop measures that are understandable, that are the public can believe in, and that are a good way for all of us to understand when we look at our schools, are we providing our kids with a good, strong education that reflects, in particular, a kind of Canadian set of goals. I can't remember how to change the slide.
I'll get it.
Somebody else changed the slide. Sorry. So we're working, as I said, in sort of two ways at the same time. One in a technical way with experts looking at how to define the measures, how to identify what could be measured, how to identify the competencies and capacities students should have, what opportunities students need to have in their schools, so that we're not just measuring outcomes, but we're measuring what needs to be happening in schools in order for students to be able to experience these things. And in the end, we will have, we hope, with the help of the public, a set of measures that are useful. The public piece is incredibly important. So this webinar is part of it. We're doing surveys with various groups, doing focus groups, doing work in school communities, and doing these webinars so that we can keep collecting information and engaging with people. We have a website where there's a dialogue already going on. So we hope that we keep on talking about this. If some clever person could change the slide, that would be fantastic. I must know how to do this. So, sorry about that. Now we're going to have part of what we're doing is we're taking polls, and we want to look at, what people, we want to find out what people think about these things. So the first statement we want to know your opinion on, and remember again when you're answering the poll, you click on the little letter. There's a little smiley face and the hand, and beside that the letter. So, first statement: developing students' citizenship skills and attitudes is an appropriate goal for schools. Do you A, strongly agree, B, somewhat agree, C, somewhat disagree, or D, strongly disagree?
I already forgot how to answer the poll, but it came to me. I really did.
I think, and again, the clever person will have to show the results. I think we've got pretty well everybody in there. So, there we go. Well, probably not surprisingly, the vast majority strongly agree. So it's interesting that it's strongly agree. I think on health we were a little bit more even between strongly and somewhat agree. And then there were no responses in some areas. Okay, we're going to go on to the next poll question. If a school has good EQAO scores, in reading, writing, and math, we can assume they're doing a good job overall, including supporting students' development as citizens. Do you A, strongly agree, B, somewhat agree, C, somewhat disagree, or D, strongly disagree? I think people have to think a little bit harder about this one. And what this is trying to get at is that for many people, the EQAO scores, because they do measure reading, writing, and math, and not in a totally narrow way, that we could actually assume from those that we could judge schools based on those scores. Okay, so in that case, I think C, somewhat disagree. So some people say, yeah, I mean, you could probably think it, we could guess that they're supporting students' development as citizens. More people somewhat disagree or strongly disagree with that. But quite a few people didn't answer, and maybe this is it's a more complex question to get at. I think those are the two polls. Yes, they are. All right, now my job is to introduce Alan Sears. And this is a really, really wonderful process for us, and we're very excited that what I should have said earlier is that in each of the domains there's a domain lead. So in the domain of health, Bruce Ferguson is the domain lead, who's a psychologist at Sick Kids Hospital. In the domain of social emotional skills, Dr. Stuart Shanker is the domain lead. He is a researcher and a professor at York University. In the area of quality learning environments, Nina Basha, a professor at OISE, is the domain lead. And for citizenship, Dr. Alan Sears is our domain lead. We're very, very pleased to have him here. He is a professor in the Faculty of Education at the University of New Brunswick and an associate editor for a whole journal on citizenship, teaching, and learning. And he's been looking at this issue for years. So it's really great for us to have somebody who has actually focused on and been thinking about how we teach children and young people to understand the ideas around citizenship, because citizenship is obviously a very broad topic, and he's been looking at mapping how kids conceptualize their democratic participation. One of the reasons this is interesting and important is we've been seeing over the years a slow, steady decline in the percentage of people who vote in Canada. So how do we encourage that kind of citizenship is what Dr. Sears has been looking at, and how do we build those capacities and those competencies in kids so that they know how to be citizens in the world. So we are really looking forward to your talk. Alan, thank you so much for doing this, and I'm going to turn it over to you.
Great, thank you, Annie. I should be on the screen, and somebody's already changed the slide. Wonderful. I think I can do that. It is wonderful to be here, and I'll just affirm before I introduce myself a little bit more what Annie said. In 2005, I co-directed an international comparative study comparing citizenship education in Canada with that in 4 international jurisdictions. And most of those places were doing far better than us, we concluded, and we developed a set of 7 criteria for the places that were quite successful. And the first criterion that we discovered was the places that were really doing a great job in citizenship education had a widespread public discussion of the issue. And the example I'm going to begin with is in England in the late 1990s. The Prime Minister, Tony Blair, appointed a blue ribbon panel under a key political science professor that produced a major report, but they consulted widely. There were public hearings, and there was a lot of engagement across the country, especially in educational circles, and it resulted in a curriculum order in 2001 that I'm going to talk about a little bit later. So I think the idea of public input and public discussion into any kind of educational change is quite key. I've been a teacher for 37 years. I'm just finishing my 37th year of teaching. And for the last 25, I've been focused on teaching and researching about citizenship education at the University of New Brunswick. And so I just want to kind of introduce you to some of the work that I've been doing and raise some of the questions for you tonight. It is possible to measure this stuff, and I'll begin by saying that in every educational jurisdiction in Canada, and in fact across the democratic world, schools say that citizenship is one of the top 2 or 3 goals that schools have. But that is not borne out by the attention that's paid to it either in the provision of good teachers, the development of curriculum materials, or the measurement of progress in the area. So it's more of a rhetorical commitment than anything else. And what you have in front of you on the screen is one model of different conceptions of citizenship proposed by Joel Westheimer, who's a research chair at the University of Ottawa, and some of his colleagues. I debated whether or not to show this one to you because I know you're going to be asked to talk about later what you think are the key elements of good citizenship, and I didn't want to preclude that. So this isn't meant to be prescriptive, but it's a way of framing citizenship. And Westheimer begins with the personally responsible citizen. This is all the kind of nice person we know that acts responsibly, obeys the law, helps those in needs, and this is the person that would go out and vote. And not one of the people that's not voting, at least most people would hold this conception. Moving along to the right, you have the participatory citizen. These are people that are more engaged. They get involved with their community. They actively participate in civic affairs. They might even join a party or run for office, that kind of thing. And on the far right, you have the justice-oriented citizen. This is a person who is oriented to shaping society more in ways, and particularly shaping it so that it is more equal and just. Right? So they recognize that there are power differentials in society, and that they are looking for those always. They explore strategies for changing them. They know about a wide range of ways of addressing civic issues, not only through the formal political system, but how you use social movements, protests, the legal system, and things like that to make change. I will say this, that the trend in curricula across Canada and around the world is toward the right side of this as you're looking at this continuum. Traditionally, civics programs focused more on the personally responsible citizen, but almost all social studies curricula, where you find citizenship in Canada, or civics curricula in the democratic world, push towards the justice-oriented citizen. Now, I would also say that we know from research that there is often a large gap between the intended curriculum and what happens in classrooms, and where these things have been measured, there's still a gap. The teaching is much more traditional than justice-oriented, but that's the trend in curricula across Canada and really around the world. Now, there has been an explosion of interest, at least, and as I said, largely rhetorical interest in citizenship education, and that comes from a sense of crisis, or I would say three crises. The crisis of ignorance, that young citizens in particular don't know the things they should know about their country and the civic processes of their community. Alienation, that they're alienated from it, they disengage from it, not only young citizens, but older ones as well, and even agnosticism, that people don't believe in the values of democracy and those kinds of things. And I've put in this chart a little bit of what those crises are manifest by. In the first case, a disengagement from formal politics. The thing we measure most, as Annie talked about, is voting rates. And in the second case, disengagement from non-formal civil associations. A lot written in the last number of years about the lack of social capital, following from the very important book about 14 or 15 years ago by Robert Putnam called Bowling Alone, arguing that our associational life in Western democracies was breaking down. And agnosticism is evident in the rise in political social extremism, gangs, neo-Nazi groups, things like that. And so for curriculum designers, the signs of health are in the right-hand column. What would we be looking for? We'd be looking for, well, a re-engagement with the political process, active participation, nonviolent, deliberative, and respectful political activity. Now, before I go on, there's a wide consensus around the world about these crises, but I think they're actually very poorly understood. And some of my research has been to try to understand them better. In Canada, we have a sense of crisis about the dropping voting rates, and particularly dropping voting rates among young people. So we rush out to fix those young people who don't vote. And we usually rush out to fix them in two ways. One is we want to tell them the techniques of voting, which in Canada is so distressingly easy that I don't know what you do on the second day of a class like that. Or we try to convince them of the be still my heart reasons for voting. But let me give you an example of a research interview I conducted a couple of years ago with a young man about 16 years old, and he was choosing from a group of pictures of people participating in various civic activities, and he chose a picture of someone dropping their ballot in a ballot box. So I said to him, so what's happening here? He said, voting. I said, tell me about voting. Well, he said, well, voting is a kind of central act in a democracy. It's the way democratic communities choose their leaders. I said, well, do you think it's important? Oh, it's really important. He said, lots of people had to fight for the right to vote. Women had to fight for the right to vote. Lots of minorities had to fight for the right to vote. Yeah, it's important. I said, are you going to vote? No. So this young man obviously knew how to vote. He even knew most of the be still my heart reasons why he should vote. but he had decided not to vote, and I can talk later about why he had made that decision. So I think we don't understand well. I don't think the young people are as ignorant as we think they are, or as alienated. Almost all of the ones that we talk to participate in some form of what I would call civic and associational life, and they want to make change. But they don't see the political system as a fit for them. I think that is a problem, but I think these crises are often very superficially understood, and we always try to move to fix the students, whereas the students might actually be identifying real issues with the system that is causing them to disengage with it. So I think that in any kind of citizenship education, we should be exploring not only what citizens should be doing, but how systems work in order to try to engage people or not engage people. I'm often told, when I tell people I'm a citizenship educator, the first thing they think is that I'm helping prepare immigrants and newcomers to take their citizenship test. And that is not what citizenship education in schools is primarily about. It's about the kinds of things we saw in that first chart about preparing people to take active roles in their society. And when I tell them that, people tell me that you can't measure it. I don't think it's true at all. And there have been measurements of citizenship education, and the best case I know is the case of England. As I said, in the late 1990s, Bernard Crick, a very prominent political scientist, led a panel that produced what is colloquially known as the Crick Report. It's an advisory committee report on citizenship. They reported to the government in 1999, and in 2001, citizenship was added to the compulsory English national curriculum for secondary schools. Now, the English did not only add citizenship to the curriculum, they put into place all kinds of structural measures to make sure that it was a success in the curriculum. Some of those measures were, for example, they created 200 spots at teacher education institutions across the country to prepare teachers every year, 200 a year, to be specialists in citizenship education. They created an organization called Citizenship, which was a consortium of teacher education institutes designed to provide in-service training to teachers who were already in schools, preparing them to teach the new citizenship curriculum. And one of the other things they did is set into place the Citizenship Education Longitudinal Study, which was run by the National Foundation for Educational Research, NEFR. You can see in the corner of that document. This is one of their reports that's pictured here. David Kerr, who's the first author listed there, was the director of that report, and that was a 10-year study to study the impact of this new citizenship curriculum in schools. And they did two things in this. They did what's called a longitudinal study. In other words, they followed cohorts of students as they moved through the program, so they could track these students' growth or lack of growth as they moved along. And they also every year did what was called a cross-sectional study. So they would dip into each grade level and test a random sample of students to see how they were measuring on various citizenship outcomes. The other interesting thing about this is that they implemented, as part of their regular school inspection system in Britain, an inspection for citizenship. And the really interesting thing about this is the curriculum mandate said that not only did you have to teach citizenship in school, but that English schools had to become more democratic places for both students and teachers. So there were mandates as part of this national curriculum that students must be included on the governors of the school. Most schools in England have if you like, a school board for each individual school, and students had to be included as governors, and not in a token way. They were to be given training and experience so that they could engage in the leadership of their school. School structures like what we would call student councils, they call them school councils, were supposed to be effective for more than just planning dances and social events. And teachers were asked every year as part of the inspection process whether or not they felt they had a voice in the running and structure of their school, whether the school was democratic for them. And in the Ofsted reports, they would rank schools on, they had a quadrant, four-space quadrant, where they would rank schools on their progress to being more democratic places. And so this is really innovative in the area of citizenship. Almost everyone who writes about citizenship education says that it must take place in a democratic context, and we can talk about what that means. It doesn't mean we vote on whether or not we have math or reading today, but it does mean that the people in a school feel like they have a voice. One of the pieces of research I'm doing right now, we're asking students about their conceptions of democratic participation, and we ask them how they participate, and we talk to them about participating in their student councils at school. They all say the schools are fairly, the student councils have no impact on school policy. And when we follow up and ask students in interviews, well, if there was a policy you wanted changed in your school, how would you go about it? Overwhelmingly, they tell us they don't know, that they know of no mechanism for actually having a voice in their school. Both Ontario and Alberta have launched pretty high-profile student voice campaigns over the last 5 or 6 years. I'm not convinced that any of them are having a huge impact as of yet. So the last slide that I'm going to show you are the results. In 2005, the government of Ontario hired a colleague and I to take a look at Ontario's citizenship and character education programs and compare them to programs around the world and across Canada. And we looked at 4 international jurisdictions: the United States, Australia, Belgium, and England, and 5 provinces across Canada. We came to the conclusion that in comparison to places around the world, the international jurisdictions, that these 4 descriptors were pretty accurate portrayals of what happens in Canada. Citizenship education is episodic. There's evidence that good work is being done, but it's not consistent, it's intermittent, and it's rarely sustained for any length of time. That it's piecemeal. That programs are developed in some areas of citizenship education while whole areas have been completely ignored. We've been on the bandwagon lately about service learning as a key element of citizenship. If you want to see one of the worst possible examples of service learning as citizenship education, you could look at the 48 hours of compulsory service mandated in Ontario. There's lots of evidence that service learning can be very effective in citizenship education, but the emphasis is on learning and not necessarily on service. In Ontario, it's just absolutely reversed. Efforts are disconnected and uncoordinated, and this is both across provinces. One of the problems with not having any consistent national voice in education in Canada is sometimes provinces are doing excellent work when no one else in the country knows they're doing it. But it's also happening within provinces. And we really found this because of, we were looking at both character and citizenship education programs, and in some cases people were doing good work in both of those areas, but they weren't talking with one another at all, and in the same province, and they had no idea what each other were doing. And the programs were, there was a diffusion of resources, and the programs were suffering because of it. So we need to have a much more coordinated effort. And finally, relevant to our talk tonight, these were unaccountable. I know of no substantial and systematic monitoring of any aspect of citizenship education in Canada. The English do it, the Australians have tried to do it, the Americans do it in several ways, so we can do it. We can learn from other people about what we might do, but we aren't doing it yet. So I think that's a quick introduction, and I'm happy to participate in the discussion and take questions as we move forward.
Thank you so much, Annie. Again, my mind is racing now, and I've been on Twitter tweeting at the same time. I think you've given us a really, truly wonderful overview. You've made me, it's been very encouraging because it's like, yes, we really should be looking at this. It's very interesting, the idea that it's piecemeal and that it's disconnected. Even saying, we have these 40 compulsory hours of community service, but that they're not actually provided in any context or necessarily building anybody's idea of service or participation or social responsibility. So I think that those are all incredibly important. Now, we want to open up the discussion to all of you who are participating. And it's really great if you can use your microphone. It's really wonderful for everybody else to hear the voices of the other people. And between Jackie and I, we'll try and notice. So what you need to do if you want to talk, and we hope you will talk and ask questions of Alan, is just put up your hand. I'm going to show you me putting up my hand. See, I have a little one and a little hand in front of my face. There's Jackie putting up her hand. Maybe she has a question. So as people ask questions, Are there any questions right now? Maybe one of the conversations that's happening in the chat has to do with inequities. So there was a nurse who talked about how well some private schools she was in were doing, and Kelly has been talking about the research about the opportunities that are unequally distributed in schools. So Alan, maybe you could talk to us a little bit about whether or not you think that there's a difference in either the demographics or the kinds of schools where opportunities for citizenship are provided, or whether there's something that everybody should be looking at in terms of the sort of equitable access for chances to participate, to learn about citizenship, to be a citizen in a school.
Yeah, I'd be happy to talk about that, and I would say a couple of things. First of all, there's an interesting book published just last year, and it's got a three-word title, and I'm not sure I get the three words in order: discipline, devotion, and dissent. It might have been other ways around, but it was about a book about religious schools, particularly Catholic, Jewish, and Islamic schools in Canada. And one of the sections of the book looked at how those schools engaged students in civic activities, in citizenship education. It's really interesting because we often have a stereotype that private schooling in generally, and particularly private religious schooling, is separationist, that it takes people out of the culture, that it is isolationist, and that wasn't the case for the schools described in this book at all, and it often isn't the case. So I think there are often really good opportunities in alternative forms of education for citizenship. One of the things that concerns me is that the kind of exemplary programs or high-end programs for citizenship in Canada are designed to make the best citizens already better, right? So let's take things like the Terry Fox Centre or the Forum for Young Canadians, programs that might bring people to Ottawa for a week, for example, give them a high-end experience in the back rooms of Parliament, meeting parliamentarians, meeting with other kids like them from across Canada, participating in a really intense civic exercise. But we pick for those things the kids with the highest marks, the most community involvement, the exemplary kids in the school, and we often leave other kids out. And so it seems to me that if you're trying to address what we know, for example, about declining voting rates, declining voting rates are dispersed differentially across social class. So people in working and lower class families are voting less than other folks. So it's a real concern. So citizenship programs in schools need to strive, I think, for more balance, more equity. We often do the same thing with student councils. We will limit who can or can't run for them based on the fact that they're already good students, already involved in the school. And that sends a message to some students, I think, to stay out.
So I think that it's an interesting point, because I know there are leadership programs also, for example, that tend to be geared towards the already high-performing students or students who may already be leaders. So when you're thinking about citizenship, and if you go drill all the way back down, part of the conversation has been about the curriculum that's there to support citizenship. Are there things that we could be doing differently all the way down into the very early grades in terms of education for citizenship that's not necessarily, you know, the grade 11 and 12 curriculum? What could be different in the very early grades? And then Summer and Hayden, why don't you ask your question now?
I was just going to make a comment about education for citizenship related to your question. I think that it's important to teach young people at an earlier age about social structures within society, so that universities and institutes of higher learning aren't playing catch up when these students are taking these courses on social structures in sociology or political science.
So I think some of that kind of goes with my question then for Alan about what could we be doing differently. Right at the right from somebody talked about, you know, there's everything I needed to know I learned in kindergarten. But what else could we be doing differently early in schools?
Well, I'll address that, and then I see Susan's asked a question about the grade 10 civics curriculum in Ontario too. But
oh, good, you caught that, Alan. I was going to mention that, so you saw it.
But I'll begin with young children. There's been a lot of work on cognition, cognitive development. The work that I do, we have interviewed children in elementary school about their understandings of democratic participation, their understandings of ethnic diversity, their understandings of dissent. There are large studies by Jerry Brophy and Janet Ullman in the United States of children's understanding of cultural universals, things like food, shelter, but also government and social structures. And what we know is that young children can, with good teaching, handle what we would think to be pretty sophisticated concepts and ideas. We also know that the largest civic study in the world was the IEA Civic Education Study, 90,000 students in 28 countries. And one of the most compelling components of that study is that by 14 students' civic, if you like, script or cognitive frame is really starting to harden. That they have a pretty well-developed and pretty solid framework of how they understand civic life, community life, by the time they're 13 or 14. So we do need to be doing much of this younger in schools, and that means sophisticated programs that wouldn't necessarily change the content, but it would greatly change our approach. So the general framework for elementary social studies curriculum has been this expanding horizons, from the child to the family to the neighborhood to the community and onward and onward. I actually think it's a flawed frame in many ways, but you can work with that if what you do is not just playing with kids. So a really interesting discussion that I saw one day in a grade 2 classroom is they had the traditional visit from the police officer who came. And the usual visit would say that, this is the kind of person you look for in the mall if you're lost. Look for a person in this kind of uniform and they'll help you. But of course the children wanted to talk about the police officer's gun. That was what they were thrilled with. And they wanted to know some very important things. Have you ever fired your gun? When can you fire your gun? Are there rules about this? These are questions that trouble police departments around the country, especially in big cities, all the time. What are the rules of engagement for police officers? These grade 2 kids wanted to ask these questions, and they could very easily understand that, in fact, there were frameworks and rules, and that those rules were not always solid, were open for discussion. One of the best social studies lessons I saw was in another primary school classroom that had a girl in it in a wheelchair, and her friends were concerned that she couldn't take her wheelchair across the gravel that was around the swing set to sit by the swing while her friends were playing on the swing. So the teacher got the idea to do a survey of the school. So the class followed her for a couple of days, trying to find which areas around the school and in the school were accessible and inaccessible. And this grade 2 or 3 classroom did a report for the principal. He was so impressed he had them to the school board office. Some are asked about learning about structures in society. These kids were learning about who the decision makers were. They were making presentations. There was a very famous case in Toronto a few years ago about a grade 5 class that led the fight to get plastic bags banned in the city. And those kids took abuse from people, right? But the teacher used those things when they were criticized as a way for the kids to understand civic dynamics. So it's possible to do lots of things with young children. To Susan's question, I think that the grade 10 half civics course has been largely a failure in Ontario. That's my sense. But for a number of reasons, not necessarily because the course itself is flawed, its implementation was flawed, because it's a half course. We know from some research that the staffing of that course was uneven, right? So you're staffing it with career and life planning, and so the teacher might not know anything about civics. It might be you're putting a teacher in that knows something about the other half of the course. I know that the 4 textbooks originally produced for the course took a very different approach to civics, some in the more traditional end of that continuum I showed above, some in the more justice-oriented end. So I think that course is a perfect example of a response to the crises I talked about before. I think it was rushed in because it was this deep sense of crisis about this disengagement, but I'm not sure that it was as thoughtfully put together as it might have been. And I see some of my colleagues and friends from Ontario on here who might object, but that's why we're talking.
I think that many would agree that there are issues, and I know that the Samara Institute is actually working with the government, I think, on rethinking and looking at the the civics curriculum. I'm not sure it was totally put in with because it was a crisis. There were a lot of things going on when that particular curriculum was put in. I think that one of the things that people have been talking about in here has to do with there's a kind of messy aspect to citizenship. So Kathy Dickmore has been talking about it, a lot of other people, about the time and the space. And I'm going to move on to the next question in a second. But I'm just wondering your opinion here. Do you think that, now that we've asked you to do the domain lead and you're doing this, that we're right in thinking that one of the issues is that if you focus, you kind of put all your eggs in one basket, or focus very, very strongly on the things that you're measuring, that we have a tendency to not leave the space and time for something like citizenship, so that it tends to get left out. Do you think that that seems to be true or true-ish in schools?
It's absolutely true, especially in elementary schools. There's all kinds of evidence that social studies, or whatever the social studies related courses are at elementary schools, are diminished in terms of the curriculum time that teachers give them. There are a number of reasons for that. One of the major reasons is the rounds of testing in math and literacy that the teachers feel they're being watched, and they are being watched, and they feel like they have to concentrate on that. Another issue is that elementary teachers are responsible in most provinces for teaching a whole range of subjects, and many of them, very few of them, come with background in history or the social sciences, areas that are more directly related to citizenship. And there are very few professional development opportunities. Again, the professional development opportunities for elementary teachers follow the money, if you like, and the testing in math and literacy. We're doing interviews right now on how elementary teachers understand ethnic diversity and how they teach about ethnic diversity. And one teacher said it perfectly. I asked her about what were her opportunities to learn about this in service, and she said in 25 years she did not remember one substantial opportunity for her to do professional learning in this area.
And
so, go ahead.
So it goes to Charles has asked a question, but I think I'm going to embed Charles's question in the next discussion question if some clever person at People for Education can move the slide. Because the next one is the thing that we are going to be wrestling with a lot, which is what is the evidence then, in a way, to lump in Charles's question. He wants to know what teachers need to be able to know and be able to do in order to help develop the capacity for citizenship. And I think that we would like to know from the participants and you, maybe you could start, but we'd really like people to jump in. What did they think when they think of citizenship? What would they accept as evidence? We're talking about clear evidence. What would a student know and be able to do that would demonstrate that they had learned something about citizenship? So we're looking for very concrete examples of what might be some things. And I actually think that Alan, you laid out some thoughts at the beginning, about things, and they were evidence. But could you tell us a tiny bit more about that, and then we'll really leave it open to other people. If people could just brainstorm what they think, and again, it's concrete ideas of what kids would know and be able to do.
Well, I don't want to say too much because I really do want to hear from people. We usually talk about the great triumvirate of citizenship. We're looking for progress in three areas: knowledge, skills, and attitudes or dispositions, or if you like. That those categories aren't nearly as neat and clean as they sound described. One of the things that I think has been a problem with citizenship education around the democratic world is become very generic. There's been a separation, for example, between history and citizenship education. And history has become depoliticized and boring, and civic education has become generic and decontextualized. We don't know, and I think all citizenship takes place in a context. And the context where citizenship takes place matters. You have to know both, as Summer asked before, you have to know the institutional and legal framework in which your citizenship is taking place, and you have to know the cultural framework and the background in which your citizenship is taking place. Let me give an example. Just Canada and the United States, very similar systems, very similar cultures, But I don't think you could possibly be elected President of the United States unless you gave strong assent to Christian faith. And I doubt you'd be elected Prime Minister of Canada if you did. That's a very different culture. You may not like either of those cultures. You may want to change them, but if you're going to operate as a citizen, you have to know them. And you have to know what it means. So they have to, I think people have to know their social, historical, and social context in terms of knowledge, but in a critical way, in a way that's fluid, not in the way we've been traditionally teaching history.
So now we have
I'll stop there.
Okay, we have some people leaping in. Charles says that a student should be able to take the role of the other person and articulate that person's point of view. Again, somebody else talks about the ability to view situations as fair or unfair. Quite concretely here, would know the tools to be more informed, engaged, or involved in civic issues. So they'd know where to go to information, how to form an informed opinion. It's very interesting. And the avenues for taking action. Here we have a student should be able to demonstrate interdisciplinary understanding. Okay, Summer and Hayden, tell me specifically how a student could demonstrate interdisciplinary understanding. Try and think of one or two examples of where you could, how you could see that. You could pick an age of a student and think of, use your mic.
I think that it would be important, for example, that they can demonstrate that they can use their numeracy skills and apply them to a social justice issue, or that they can use their reading and writing skills to critically examine a political platform or position. I'm thinking maybe by middle school, to show that they're not just able to function within academic silos. Because often when students get to university, they can't make those connections anymore. Different types of knowledge has been privileged and they can no longer make those connections, and I think that shows the dissatisfaction that employers have as well with their ability to connect the subject areas.
That's great. And does anybody else have some very, so that if you were looking at a school and you were going, wow, this school really knows how to promote citizenship, what would you see in the school that would be different? Kathy Bickmore said that a student might need to learn how to disagree constructively. That is a really wonderful. So that goes to people's leeriness about having political conversations in school. They get some people get very worried about whether or not that's an acceptable thing to do. So that, and Kathy says the key is that schools have to provide opportunities for all students, and this goes back to the, is this equitably promoted in schools. So are there any, so that if I'm thinking of a school, and say it's an elementary school, goes up to grade 8, and I'm looking at the school and I really want to see good, strong evidence in the school that the school is promoting citizenship. Does anybody else have any ideas of what might be going on in that school? People are talking about how they should be able to understand the structure and function of government. They should know how to investigate the ethical dimensions of issues. So then it goes to probably time to have those discussions, to wrestle with hard ideas. Diana and Kathy are agreeing with each other like mad about student council, so maybe this partly goes to Alan's point, though, too, that we have to make sure that our student councils aren't just already perfect students. They're not. They're different kinds of students. It's more like the students I had in my family, that they're encouraged to be on student councils, and that in fact they're not limited in what they can do. Their voice is a real voice. Charles says they should be able to appreciate how institutions have changed, economic and legal systems, social structures. So it's understanding the institution, but I think that everybody's also saying that the So now Kathy is saying, should citizenship be assessed with pre-specified learning outcomes or with the activities in which all students are enabled to get engaged? That is the $65 million question. Kelly says, or both, and we're going to talk about that in a minute about what are the pros and cons of measuring these things. So I think that everybody's bringing up conflict resolution programs. We're brainstorming a fantastic list here. Yeah, so somebody's asking an even broader question. What will you accept as evidence that communities and community leaders are promoting citizenship? I think we're going to keep it focused on our schools for now. So a lot of your talk is about collaboration. We would see them collaborating. There would be, they would be able to voice their opinions. They would understand other people's opinions, able to take action. So there is this sense then that that citizenship isn't just about the curriculum that's delivered at you, but it is about the capacity to participate democratically in your school. Kelly is saying that one of the things civic education, that the study that Alan talks about, they talk about students' ability to understand political communication, so to be able to decode it. It's funny, I was just going back and reading about Ryerson, Edgerton Ryerson, who's one of the founders of Canada's public education system, and he actually talks about the importance of education being that it educates everyone to be able to know who the duplicitous politicians are. So it really is about democratic participation because you have to be able to know who's lying to you. So I think that we have a wonderful bunch of different things to add to our basket of what could possibly be evidence, and that is part of what we'll be looking at as we move forward for this. So we're actually going to have a little quick poll here. We have the wonderful poll. It's some magic person. It's like there's an elf out there who just does things when they come up. So this is the question, and think hard about this question because it gets very specific then when we start to get to the sort of when the rubber hits the road. Do you think we should set goals for our schools in the area of citizenship and find ways to measure progress towards those goals? So we're leaving it a bit broad right now. They could be goals in different grades. They could be goals overall. But should we set goals for our schools in the area of citizenship and find ways to measure progress toward those goals? A, no. Citizenship goals or measures are, take away that comma. No citizenship goals or measures are needed in our schools. B, we should set explicit goals but not measure progress. C, we should set explicit goals and measure progress. So the first one is no, we don't need the goals or the measures. The second one is yes, we should set goals, but we don't need the measures. The third one, C, is we should, we should set explicit goals and measure progress. And even I've forgotten how to vote. There we go.
Just a reminder to everyone that you just click on the fourth box over with the A in the box. You just click on it and you can choose your menu item from there.
Thank you for the reminder, Jackie, because I'd forgotten how to do it too.
That's okay. I had to think about it for a second too.
I think maybe everybody's voted who wants to vote. Oh, a few more people voting. Okay.
It's a really hard question, so I was giving them a bit of time to do it. But okay, we can move on here in just a second. I'm just looking at the, okay, we've got 19. So I'm doing numbers here. We're close to it. Okay, so I think I will publish now.
Okay, so some people didn't want to vote on this at all. So nobody thought that no goals were needed. Some people definitely thought that, yes, it's really good to have goals, but the measuring isn't necessarily part of this. But a substantial number of people said, yes, we should set explicit goals and we should measure progress. So if we think that, then we get to the sticky parts. And I hope that you guys, we really want to know the pros of this, what's good about setting goals and measuring progress, but we also want to know what the cons are. So because it's really important that in a democratic way and in a way that promotes citizenship among all of us right now, that our work on this as an organization isn't about, we haven't really truly already decided everything, already got it figured out, and we're just pretending to talk to people. We know that this is a very complex conversation and that it's important that we wrestle with all of the hard pieces of this. So the third discussion question is about the pros and cons of setting goals for schools in the area of citizenship and finding ways to measure progress towards those goals. Now, Kelly Gallagher-Mackay, our research director, has said, Annie, could you please not tell everybody all the cons before we start the conversation? Which is probably a good point. But I think it's important that everybody think about, we have measures right now. There are, in Ontario, in terms of our goals for schools, some people think they're great, some people have issues with them. So thinking of the ways you think they're great and the ways you have issues, and thinking of that in terms of citizenship, what would be some of the pros or some of the cons of setting goals for schools in the area of citizenship? So you can type in your answer, or please put up your hand and talk, and then everybody doesn't just have to listen to me. So Charles makes a really good point. This has been the hardest thing in my whole life, actually, that selecting goals implies making decisions about what is included and what is excluded. That's one of the aspects of setting goals that some people do not care for. I find that about life, that always, if you pick one party, you can't go to the other one. I really struggle with that. I always buy all the pairs of shoes instead of one of them. Here's somebody who's put their hand up, which is Diana. Go ahead.
Thanks, Annie. I'm not sure if this is a pro and a con, but just that there are so many demands placed on schools about things to cover, that having specific goals and measurements will put it on the radar, but by having it, it may also get people feeling overwhelmed or feeling like, oh, it's another thing we have to do.
I think that's a very good point, and one of the things that we've been saying to teachers who have brought that up a lot is that what we're trying to do, part of this process is actually looking at the curriculum policy in Ontario, is trying to focus on what's already being done, and be able to promote that work already. But when we get to measuring, there may be some added work there. People are also bringing up here that some things are difficult to measure, important aspects of citizenship. Caring is a hard thing to measure. Summer and Hayden say like health, but I'd say like health and like many other things, there could be competition between schools, which could be positive and negative. And I think that goes to Kathy Dickbor's points too, that when you start to measure, you set goals, you find a way to measure. If you're only measuring the outcomes, it's possible that then you would end up repeating what already happens, which is that some schools, the students at some schools would be framed as kind of failing in citizenship learning, and they would tend to be perhaps the less privileged students, and the schools that offer lots of opportunities, the students wouldn't fail, and those schools, we already know, in fact, those schools tend to be in areas where with a higher, if you will, socioeconomic status. So one of the worries about measuring is that you set up that competition, or you actually reinforce the disadvantage that already exists. Is there a way of getting around that, where you can have measures that don't either set up that competition, that ranking? And Alan's example of England and Ofsted, they do rank schools. Is there a way of getting around that issue? Anybody? Alan, the expert, has his hand up. You may speak, Alan.
It is tough to measure, and I agree with the concerns that these just add pressures to teachers. Assessment programs are reported on so abysmally in this country. I'm not an opponent of standardized testing, but I'm an opponent of the way, almost all the ways that it's reported and the ways that it's used to bash teachers in schools. I do think there are ways around this. One of the things is to measure the ways that citizenship contributes to literacy and numeracy. I think it was Summer that mentioned earlier that there are all kinds of numeracy concepts and skills that are relevant to citizenship education. Almost every citizen hears almost every day that this survey is accurate with some plus or minus 3%, 19 times out of 20, and almost none of them have any idea what that means. So we can be using citizenship to help teach statistics, demographic data. We can be citizenship certainly contributes to literacy. There are very interesting programs in the United States about civic writing, civic speaking, and now with other kinds of media civic presentations. So I would argue that healthy citizenship education will not detract from any literacy program. So we might include aspects of civic speaking, civic writing. As one of the people pointed out here, that the big civic education survey that I talked about before, a big component of it was could students decode political messages in political pamphlets. So some of these things can be embedded in testing that we're already doing, for example. Another thing that Ofsted does, and does particularly well in England, is it identifies in all of its qualitative reports examples of best practice, and they detail them thoroughly. So they'll tell you what the schools are doing. And I think assessment that gets at that is very positive for school reform, and not in a way where you make everybody do the same thing. But one of my own philosophies about school reform is it's best taken up when people see something that they think will work in their context and try it. So I think one of the things we need to seek to do with assessment is identify best practice and communicate that best practice to other people. As I said, when we did our study for Ontario, we found all kinds of people doing innovative and interesting things, and but other people didn't know about it. And we've been very poor at that. So assessment is not only about assessing kids or assessing schools. It can be about assessing programs, identifying very good ones, and then giving them some profile.
Annie, your mic's not on.
Oh, thank you. I was saying such incredibly intelligent things, too. I think that what you're saying, Alan, is that goes to then the possibility that you can't, that there's a, maybe danger is too strong a word, but there's a danger in just one assessment. I hate to say this, that if you just assess, this is what Kathy's been saying, a lot of people in the chat too, if you just assess the outcome and one particular outcome, you're going to miss the point. Whereas either assessing programs or assessing the opportunities for participation, people are talking in the chat about the opportunities for people working in groups, project-oriented work. These are all signs of citizenship in a school. I think that what you all agree, Diana's talking about media literacy, which is also part of being able to participate as a citizen. And Michelle says that when she thinks of citizenship, she thinks less of lesson work and more about the culture of a school and beliefs. And I think that that is interesting too, so that somehow when we're putting this together, getting to the, and I've been part of a number of discussions now, and once you get to having to make the actual choice, I just went to an international discussion, and that everybody agreed about how important measurement was and setting goals was until it got to the actual setting or the actual picking, and then they really, really disagreed from all over the world very strongly. So this part's going to be interesting for us. I think that a lot of people are agreeing that more PD, more professional development for teachers, and more understanding of what that actually means in a school would make a big difference. So Michelle brings up, is it possible to assess someone's personal citizenship? And I think that's a really good question. And we're going back to this, effective citizens need the skills to listen, to think, to communicate, to advocate. Charles earlier talked about empathy. So are these things, Alan, that are being assessed in other places, that are being looked at and fall into this basket of citizenship?
Yes, I think they are. I mean, Charles had made a comment earlier in the text that the measurement piece is not all that difficult. It's deciding what to measure. There are all kinds of examples of the IEA study has all kinds of items you could borrow if you wanted to test for knowledge and dispositions about things. There are researchers working on this. Kathy Bickbor's work, our work on how kids frame things. You can easily take some of the qualitative stimuli that we use to get people talking and use them in more qualitative measures. In terms of measuring somebody's personal citizenship, having them doing it on a portfolio basis or a performance assessment basis is always a possibility. And people tell me, well, you can't do that. It costs too much money. Well, we do that in French immersion programs all the time because we have the political will. We send interviewers around the school to actually talk to students about how they're doing because we have the political will to do this. I'm not big on thinking that this has to be testing every kid in every province all the time. I would be more open to the notion of kind of some selective assessment where the purpose is not to, if you like, assess the children at all, but rather to assess the progress of the program. And you can get a good idea of the progress of the program from assessing a sample of people in it. And so the information comes back to us, how well are we doing in this particular area, and not how well is this child or this school doing in this particular area. So I do think it's possible. It takes political will to do it. If it's difficult, and people haven't done it a lot around the world, that makes it kind of exciting because we may be breaking ground here, might be showing people how to do it. I think one of the things you do is you go into this with the idea that your measures are contentious and tentative. So as you're doing it, you're open to hearing about whether or not they're working, whether or not they're giving us data that we actually can use, and what might actually give us that data if they're not working, so that that assessments can be adapted.
Thank you. That's really great, and I think that it is. I like that it's good that they're contentious. I think that it's also what's important here is, I mean, even just beginning to have this discussion and to recognize that in the report cards already, students are assessed already on their report cards in all grades on various aspects of citizenship. And part of our job working with everybody else is to try and shift the public perspective away from this idea that you really just need to know one or two things, and that those are the most important things about schools or about education, that as long as kids can read and write and do math, everything else is kind of gravy, and begin to sort of add these pieces and say all of these are core important points. So we know that they're being assessed in various ways on report cards, getting the public to recognize that that's a very important part of learning, but also then to be able to deal with the scary bit of what can we look like, and is it a basket of things we need to look at? Do we need to assess the kinds of programs, the measure of how is a school doing overall in promoting citizenship, and then especially what Kathy has brought up and other people, what are the opportunities in the school to participate? So in the people at the end here, someone has said another vote for holistic education, and I think that we agree about the holistic, but I think there's a tendency in a kind of political, cynical world to say the holistic, airy-fairy, where's the solid, crisp, real, concrete goals, and how are we able to measure our progress towards those goals? So it's in a way coming out of that idea and the ideal and the goal of education is it needs to be broadly based, but we also have to be concrete about what we're saying. Kelly says holistic doesn't have to be mushy, but it might have to be complex, and I think that's a very good point. I think that we're nearly getting ready to finish here. How about if anybody else? Oh, there, Alan has another idea. Yes, please.
Well, I just want to follow up on that point that it doesn't have to be mushy. I would be an advocate for relatively traditional forms of knowledge. In our work on how students conceptualize, we think there are a core of 8 or 10 key underlying principles or concepts that underlie democracy, but that those are all contested and fluid. So kids should know about, as Charles said earlier, government systems. But they shouldn't learn about them as if they were stagnant and fixed. So if democracy is government of the people, well, it begs two questions. Who are the people that get to give their consent? And in different societies at different times, those have included different groups of people. And in Canada, we exclude people who aren't 18, for example, who aren't legal citizens. And that's contentious. Some parts of the world let immigrants vote. And the second question is, how do they give their consent? Do they do it in a first-past-the-post system? Do they do it in a proportional system? Do they do it through direct democracy? And so we would say that if a person is educated about that concept, when they have some understanding about how that's been understood and implemented in different societies across time and contexts, and also that they can take a stand on how they think it should work in their own society at that time. So while they're learning about voting systems, if you like, or government systems, it's not in a stagnant way. It's in a way that understands that these are contested and fluid, that they have changed over time, and they will change over time. So that's some of it's pretty traditional knowledge, but it's knowledge that is, it's not, I tell my students they can't use the F words, fixed, final, and forever.
That's really, that is really great. And I think maybe we all, you, Alan, us People for Education, and all the people in this webinar also need to think about how we can more clearly and concretely connect, make the case to the outside world of the connection between how we teach, think about, act on citizenship in our schools, the connection between that and the health of our society, of our democracy, of kids' chances for prospering in the world, their understanding of themselves in the world. And maybe so far we haven't done enough to make that case, to say, if you do this in schools, these are the kinds of things, this kind of impact it will have on our society. Because part of it is being able to get the outside world, the world that's not directly connected to education, to understand that what we're building in our schools is the next generation of society, and that next generation of society needs many different capacities and competencies, and they definitely need to be able to get jobs and to have the skills that they need for those jobs, but they also need to have the skills and the competencies necessary to function in society in those multiple ways. So I think that probably we need to do more proving on that score. Are there any last thoughts anybody has on any more, why this is an appalling idea or why this is a great idea in terms of measuring citizenship in schools? I think we've definitely made the case that holistic is something that we want, and that holistic does not have to be mushy. Are there any more questions? Okay, so this conversation is going to keep on going on multiple levels, and we want you to stay part of it. So you can add, there are some links up here on the screen. You can add your thoughts by clicking on that first link where these questions are repeated. If suddenly in the middle of the night, that's when I do my best thinking at 4 o'clock in the morning, you go, I know what would be evidence. If we just looked at this, we'd have the whole thing figured out. So if you have some kind of brilliant 4 o'clock in the morning idea, put it there, or any time. You please join the email list, so we're going to send updates. We will very, very quickly, the fabulous, amazing Megan will take all of this, turn it into a short video that you can watch if you want to share it with people. Everybody's been taking great notes, so we'll send the notes out on what got talked about today. You can join us on Facebook at measuring.what.matters. And you can participate in more webinars. There's one coming up, I think sometime in April, with Dr. Stuart Shanker about social emotional skills, which was another whole either can of worms or basket of joy, depending on how you look at it. I was at a big meeting yesterday with all sorts of corporate types talking about what they needed in their employees, and they all talked about what they call soft skills. So those are in the social emotional skills department. So we will keep you posted. We really want you to stay part of this conversation. We want you to share it with other people, bring other people in, because really our goal is always to change the world, to make things better, to make our schools work in the best possible way, and to make the link between what happens in our schools and what happens in our world. So I think that Jackie is going to give us the final sign-off here, but that's it for me. Thank you very, very much. You've been fantastic, and you have really, really offered a lot of really great and very concrete thoughts on this. So I turn it over to you, Jackie.
Okay, thanks everyone. Oops, listen, that put my feet off my table, doesn't it? I just wanted to thank all of you for participating. I think it's really helpful when we have so many voices, and you were all
I'm sorry, Jackie, I have to interrupt.
Go ahead.
I should have thanked Alan. Thank you so much, Alan.
I was going to do that.
Okay, you thank him.
Oh, what a team we are over here. I did want to thank all the participants, and I want to send out a huge thank you to Alan. You really helped us frame this conversation, and I know I'm looking forward to working with you more on the initiative. I also want to thank our background gals, Dana and Megan, who I think Megan was on the phone the entire time trying to help people, and Kelly, who is the grand champion of the chat box. I didn't have to do anything because she was so quick off the draw in responding. So I think we made a great team tonight. I want to thank you all again for participating, and please do join us online. Megan will be sending out the slides, and we will be posting this online as soon as we connect up the chat with the slide deck. So everything will be available for you to watch again. Thanks, everyone. Have a great night.